Hey everyone, Tactics here, and today I wanted to talk about how to be a better WoW player, specifically in PvE content. I'll be going over 6 tips that you can use to improve yourself, whether you're a brand new player, a key pusher, someone who aims for AOTC every tier, or a mythic raider. These are tips that everyone can use to push their PvE game up to another level. This video will be fairly brief when it comes to explanations of these tips to keep it short and digestible, but I will be putting out individual videos for some of these tips in the near future that go just more in depth, so be sure to subscribe to the channel to be notified when those get posted, and let's just get started. Tip number 1, knowing and using your entire toolkit. This may seem like a no-brainer for a lot of you, but you'd be surprised the number of players that just don't know they have certain abilities or what some of their abilities even do. Something I recommend everyone do is just take 5 minutes, open up your spellbook, and just go through everything, making sure you know what all your abilities actually do, what interactions they may have with other spells that you have, and all those kinds of things. Knowing is the first step, but then actually using these abilities as much as possible is just as, if not more, important. Whether it's damage CDs, defensive abilities, or utility spells like interrupts, using them as much as you can over the course of a raid or dungeon fight is extremely important. As you start pushing higher end content, there may be certain pulls in dungeons you want to make sure you save CDs for, or certain moments in boss fights that you want to hold damage for to make a DPS check, but as a good basic rule of thumb outside of those situations is to just send these abilities on cooldown, assuming whatever you're hitting is going to be alive for the entire duration of your CD. Defensive and utility spells are a bit different, but similar principles can apply. If you just send a defensive CD at any point where you're going to be taking a decent amount of damage, you're going to get good value from it, right? Some examples are the breath during the first boss of Necrotic Wake, when the icicles are exploding during the Kel'Thuzad encounter, things like that. Those moments you know you're going to be taking damage, and while these situations may not kill you outright, using your defensive tier will still make your healer's job easier, which is something that you want to do. Next up, we have tip number 2, which is taking accountability and learning from your own mistakes. This is a really important one. Everyone messes up. I do it. You do it. Even players on the highest level of keys and in the race to world first make mistakes. What matters is what you do afterwards. Everyone has been in those groups where like the DPS players are pulling extra packs and then yelling at the tank for not holding aggro, or you have that tank that just pulls half the dungeon and dies and then blames the healer for not keeping him alive. Don't be one of those players. Not only does no one like playing with those guys, but it's actually a clear indicator that you're a bad player. Throwing around blame in a group doesn't accomplish anything, and it can be kind of a missed opportunity for you to improve yourself. Regardless of whose fault something is, when something like a wipe or even just an individual death happens, you need to take a step back and think, what can I do personally that would have changed or maybe even just gotten a slightly better result? You cannot control what other players around you do, but you can control how you react to different situations as an individual. That's where this tip kind of ties into our first tip again, knowing and using your full toolkit. Pretty much every spec in the game has some sort of utility or defensive ability that they can use to help them or their teammates get out of a bad situation, but if you don't know about it, you may as well not even have that ability in the first place. I do have a lot to say about this topic, but like I said earlier, I want to keep this video fairly short and condensed, so be on the lookout for a standalone video diving deeper into this tip alone. Moving on, tip number 3, having a good readable UI is extremely important, as is having good keybinds. A common theme that you're going to see among top-end PvE players is a clean, compact UI, usually with the important buttons for whatever spec they're playing pushed slightly towards the middle of their screen, as it lets you keep an eye on both your relevant cooldowns as well as your character. They usually don't have a lot of clutter and often have most of the previously mentioned keybinds hidden. As for many spells, especially those without a cooldown, you don't really need to see them all the time. I also like to switch up my UI every so often, usually at the beginning of an expansion, and while it certainly needs some more done to it, it's a pretty decent starting point for anyone that's looking at what one of these UIs may look like, so I'll post a link to the LVY profile that I'm using in the description below in case anyone wants to see or use it for themselves. Keybinds, again though, tie back into the first tip of using your full toolkit. It's great if you know your abilities, but if they aren't bound and you can't quickly use them effectively or efficiently should the situation arise, then why do you even have them, right? Different keybinds are going to be comfortable for different players and easier to reach for different players, depending on like things like how big your hands are and like where you rest them on the keyboard. So this is mostly up to personal preference. Something I will recommend though is having a modifier key for your keybinds. So for me, the most comfortable modifier to press is Shift. So I have all my regular keybinds like 1, 2, 3, 4, Q, E, R, those kind of things. And then I have all those with a Shift modifier as well, potentially doubling my keybinds from regular keys and while still being fairly comfortable to press. But other good modifier keybinds are, besides Shift, is Control and Alt. So if either one of those is more comfortable, those work great as well. I also have an MMO gaming mouse with 12 buttons on it, and while not mandatory, I will say it is extremely helpful, giving you way more easy to access keybinds than you can fit onto your keyboard. Tip number 4 is maximizing your GCD usage. And now I do want to point out off the top here that there are some exceptions for sure. There are certain specs that want to do things like pool energy, but I would say those are mostly outliers and not the norm. For the vast majority of specs in the game, if you miss a GCD, delay a spellcast, anything like that, it is lost throughput. If you have to stop and think about what ability you're going to use next, likely you're already starting to fall behind on your GCDs, making it extremely important to know your abilities, how they all interact, and the priority you want to use them in. Initially, practicing on a dummy can help you get the basics, but 100% I believe that you need to practice in real PvE scenarios, whether that's a mythic dungeon, LFR, doesn't matter, but some form of content where you're not just solely focusing on your rotation. There's more going on that you have to do, and you get used to doing that while also hitting your abilities correctly. An important thing to keep in mind though is the common saying, dead DPS don't do DPS. If you're dead on the ground, you're missing tons of GCDs, so don't mistake this tip for me saying you can't ever delay a GCD to move out of the stuff on the ground. That's not at all what I'm saying. Instead, find ways to position your character so you can easily avoid mechanics, use your gap closing abilities, and in general try to move as little as possible while still avoiding the bad stuff. Doing so will give you more opportunities to press your buttons undisturbed, and being extremely familiar with your rotation will allow you to squeak in damage during these movements, and every little bit does count. Even if it's just a single extra GCD, that is some damage, which is better than no damage. From there, we have a tip that will hopefully help you learn from your own mistakes, which is recording your own gameplay. Doing this and reviewing the footage allows you to not only review obvious problem moments that you can see what went wrong exactly and what you can change in the future, but it also lets you catch a bunch of mini little mistakes that you made but may have not noticed in the moment. If you can't personally record for whatever reason, try and see if like Guildy or someone you know in the group can do this and give you the video. As it is better than nothing, but I definitely recommend looking into some of the lower impact video recording software out there, as videos will be so much more helpful to you if it's from your own perspective. On top of this, watching top-end players of your spec or role can also be extremely helpful, as you can see and compare what you did versus what they did, see some of the intricacies of how they handle their rotation, learn from the mistakes that they make on stream, and much more. There are plenty of top-end players streaming over on Twitch and here on YouTube, and for a shameless plug, if you're interested in tank content, both in cutting-edge rating and high Mythic Plus keys, feel free to stop by my stream at Tactics over on Twitch. And that brings us to our final tip, which is the easiest but also the most important: play the game. If you want to improve at something, no matter what it is, practice is key, and WoW is no different. The top end players didn't magically become good at the game. They spent hours and hours playing, practicing their specs, learning how to adapt to different situations, and improving themselves. Now, I'm not saying you need to put in insane hours playing the game to improve yourself. Just that the more time you do choose to put into the game, not just playing, but actively trying to improve your gameplay, the better the results you'll see. But that does wrap up this video, guys, giving you 6 tips to improve yourself in World of Warcraft. What do you guys think of these tips? Anything I missed? Let me know down in the comments below, and be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe for more content like it. You can also come stop by my Twitch channel at Tactics and say hi. That is it for now, though. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.